Okay, welcome to week 3 of Introduction to Criminal Law. And I'm Richard Wright, but you know that already. And so we are at the halfway point. As I always tell students, we are starting the halfway point. Next week we'll be in the second half, 4th, 5th, and 6th weeks of assignments. And that the quarter will be over in about 3 weeks. To be exact, it ends on September 14th on Friday, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. So it is very important that you keep your assignments up to date. Sometimes I fall a little behind with the grading because I have so many students, but I'm working on getting that done. And but I'm right pretty close, not too far off with you guys in the 5.5 week classes that I'm teaching, which are 3 of them, and 2 11-week classes that overlap. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and get started right away. So let's go ahead and get you going here. Let's share my screen. There we go. You can see the page that you're familiar with, which is the home page. When you open it up, it provides information on the right side all the way down. It's talking about the fact that the rubrics are located in each week's assignment, which we're going to go over. It reminds you when your lectures are every Tuesday from 8:30 p.m. Central Standard to 9:30, give or take a few minutes, sometimes earlier. I have the archive of the lecture under recordings for week 1, week 2, and then later on I will send you out the link as well as include week 3 in here. So now let's look at the week 3 announcements. Okay, here we go. So in this week, we're going to deal with crimes against persons. We dealt with crimes against property previously, and we dealt with that previously. Close that door. And so we dealt with crimes against property and now crimes against persons. And to prepare for that, I gave you the PowerPoints for chapters 4, 5, and 6 of the textbook. And we're dealing with the activities: homicide, battery, domestic violence, sexual assault crimes, key terms for practice, special circumstances, homicide, qualifications, classifications, and quiz. And as I always say, use those extra resources because they help you to prepare for the actual exams that are coming. As a matter of fact, this week there will be one quiz, which is the midterm, pretty much. So the discussion post is, what type of homicide is this? So you're going to answer that information by tonight, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time, and the reply post by Saturday, 11:59 p.m. Central Standard Time. And then finally, you have your written assignment, spousal rape. So you're going to provide answers to that. I'm going to go over that in the rubric. And then the quiz, which is timed. And then you know my motto, you know what that's all about, because I discussed that with you during the open house. So let's take a look at our calendars real quick. And for this week, we're at the week of the 20th. Your reading assignment, your initial post due tonight, your live lecture taking place right now, your reply post due Saturday, and then Sunday the 26th, your written assignment is your spousal rape as well. You also have, oh, that's in there twice. So should be a quiz in there. That's what really should be in there, because there is a quiz for this week, as you'll see in a few minutes. Okay? As a matter of fact, let's fix that. Okay, let's fix that. So we put that on there correctly. Okay. And that is going to be a timed quiz. Okay, so we'll save that. Okay, so there it is now. So it is the quiz. All right. So now let's go to the week 3 module. And let's look at the assignments. Okay, here we go. There's your discussion post. That's due. Your written assignment, and then down here is the quiz. Okay? So you want to make sure you do that, and then your live lecture as well. You'll notice that just going back to show you something, I want you to see this. Going back to, if I can get it open, the course schedule, which is under Get It Started. You'll see that your week 3, you have an actual quiz that counts. That's what we're talking about. You won't have one for week 4. You won't have one for week 5, but you will have one in week 6. So there are 2 quizzes that count. So that's week 3 and week 6. Okay, so now let's go back to the assignments. Your discussion post, you know how that works. But here is your written assignment. First of all, it tells you when it's due, 11:59 p.m. this Sunday, possible 40 points. And make sure that you satisfy. Notice this is a 2-part assignment. The rubric breaks it down that way too. So for part 1, examine the types of crimes committed, and it tells you what to do to get these 15 points. Part 2 is conducting the interview. Okay, so this total part is 30 points. Then you come down here. Oops, we lost it. Go back. There we go. So then you have your 10 points total for actually grammar and APA. So you want to make sure you do have APA, citations in the body and references at the end, and make sure that the first part is a 2-page document. The second page is a 1-page document, and provide citations and references in your paper. Okay? Any questions about the written assignment or the quiz? You can type in if you have any. If not, I'll presume there are none. Any questions? Okay. All righty. So we're all good there. All right, so then we'll go back to number 3. Excuse me. So now let's go to the lesson content itself. Okay, so talk about crimes against people. Crimes against people for this week. Again, it tells you your reading assignments. Tells you there's a section on homicide. We're going to discuss battery, domestic violence, sexual assault. Then we're going to kind of go over these a little bit. I'm not going to do all those for practice, but I'm going to, again, encourage you to do them. So let's talk about homicide. Homicide ranges from, depending on what jurisdiction you're in, first-degree murder. We generally have, in our jurisdiction, Illinois, murder, and then we'll have manslaughter, which, and then involuntary manslaughter as well. But in the overall scheme of things, to understand it, there is a very minor difference between first-degree murder and second-degree murder. But basically, we're talking about, when we say the term homicide, we're talking about someone being killed by another. Now, homicide doesn't always mean that a person going to jail, because there's a thing called justifiable homicide, which we'll talk about in a few minutes. And if it's justifiable, it's lawful. If it's not justifiable, then it will be classified as one of the crimes. So it says in our little note here that when the law enforcement officers use deadly force to prevent bodily harm from others or protect themselves, then it's lawful or justifiable. And the same thing applies to an individual. When deadly force is used to prevent great bodily harm to a person or others, it's the same kind of thing. Now, there's some arguments and issues about the stand your ground law, which is primarily discussed in the state of Florida. But one of the key things about that law that you must always remember is that that person has to use the right amount of force to do exactly what it says. So let's say, for example, if a person comes at you and they have a, let me see, something really minor. Okay, a little sandwich knife, not a butcher knife or a huge knife. And then you take out a gun and shoot them. Chances are it's going to be involuntary manslaughter, probably. But it will be a homicide that's not justifiable. That's my whole point in a nutshell. So you have to be able to use the amount of force. But when deadly force is used, it is extremely critical. We have a lot of we call excessive force instances now involving law enforcement, and so we're dealing with a lot of this across the United States of America. On the other hand, they talk about when an upset boyfriend kills a girlfriend because he believes they cheated on him, then the killing is unlawful and is referred to as murder, though it could depend on a lot of the circumstances, because it could end up being manslaughter, because if the person does it like in the heat of passion, without any planning, in a situation like that, or even to some level of extent not on purpose, then you can find that individual guilty of manslaughter as opposed to murder. So murder is basically reduced to the least common terminology, unlawful killing of a person by another. That's where it starts generally. So let's go to just very quickly take a look at a few of these. I'm not going to go into detail with all of them. But first-degree murder, the killer has, you have to have two things: premeditation, that is that you already planned it out or you thought, and the idea is to kill that person. So when we say forethought, that involves some actions or statements, something the person said, something the person did, to indicate that they plotted and planned. So various jurisdictions have different definitions of it, such as they're using here the state of Minnesota, which is murder in the first degree. When you cause someone's death, we already talked about that, and it is premeditation and you intend to kill them. That's what your goal is. That's what it is. Okay? And sometimes, if it says here, for example, if it was later determined that the killer had told a person of his intent to kill the person, and in fact comes out with the action, the previous statement could be used to support premeditation, okay, or on purpose. But sometimes it's obvious. The person says you're going to die, and then they do something and either fire a gun or they do something at an individual and they die. Okay, motive could also be uncovered to show that the person intended to kill a person. For example, if they emailed evidence or provided some written notes, I'm going to kill. Whoops, jumped too fast. Go back to says I'm going to kill you in that instance, and then they do it. Then that motive to collect insurance money or something, then that motive shows up. So at the most serious level of murder, we're talking about first-degree murder. Now, if you pay attention to this, murder in the second degree, based on, again, another statute in the state of Colorado, is that person on a date knowingly caused the death of another. Now, the second degree murder, you don't have to have premeditation or one's mindset, but include the intentional killing of a person by another. Second degree murder can also be used as voluntary manslaughter. That's what I said earlier. And so that means that the person didn't really intend on killing, but they went out of control. I know of a case in Illinois where a guy actually was trying to, how should I say, he was upset with his girlfriend, and she was talking to him about him being married, and she found out, and he ended up in a fight with her, and did something, struck her, and she hit her head. Well, then he disposed of the body. Well, he was charged with involuntary manslaughter because it was demonstrated that he wasn't planning on killing that person. A person, for example, could be upset and do something with someone, and while they're in what we call the heat of passion, and they actually do something, then they could be charged with second-degree murder. Now, in those instances, there is no planning. There's no pre-planning. It just takes place simultaneously. Voluntary manslaughter, according to Tennessee, is the intentional or knowing killing of another in a state of passion, produced by adequate provocation, sufficient to lead a reasonable person to act in an irrational manner. So get somebody upset and they're not thinking at the time they do it, then some jurisdictions use second-degree murder or voluntary manslaughter. That's what I was telling you earlier. Okay. With the and then the special circumstances, just briefly, aggravated factors, things that make it closer to murder, is future dangers, the possibility that the defendant could commit crimes of violence that would constitute a continuing serious threat or vileness. And then they talk about second-degree homicide, special circumstances, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time dealing with those special circumstances. Be aware of the general first-degree murder, malice aforethought, planning, and all of that. Second degree is almost the same as voluntary. In some jurisdictions, it is voluntary manslaughter. Okay. Involuntary manslaughter can come about totally unplanned. For driving a vehicle while under the influence, it says a person driving recklessly, speeding, kills another person, may be prosecuted for involuntary manslaughter. Driving under the influence, those kinds of things. Okay, so recklessness, though, can depend. And it says dealing with the term utter disregard, which is involved. In other words, they don't have any regard for the person. It means no regard for human life, and a course of action which actually or deliberate intention to harm, if not intentional, shows an indifference. In other words, I don't care if that person, is safe or not. And so it's disregard of safety, basically. On the other hand, recklessness simply means indifferent or careless to the welfare of other people all by itself. All by itself. So there are degrees of involuntary manslaughter as well. So I'm not going to talk about one punch homicide. Involuntary manslaughter can occur in battery cases where somebody does something and they hit their heads or something like that. They didn't intend for the person to die. So you have to take time to look at those clips. So these are some general homicide instances. Homicide, once again, means that someone died. Okay, now, some other crimes that are against a person, but that doesn't result in that person's death. They could have injury or no injury. And that battery depends on whether or not there's a weapon involved or something other than just a hit. Now, be aware is that when we get to the point of battery, it becomes aggravated if a weapon is used. Now, if a person who strikes a person is a karate expert or a boxer, and they strike someone with their fists, that can be considered as aggravated battery because their hands are considered as dangerous weapons. But the normal course of action, most people don't have that issue. And so you have what we call simple battery, intentionally injuring another and not with their consent. Okay, some states battery may be referred to as assault. I really have a lot of trouble with that one because assault basically is different from battery. They're two different things, and I'll explain to you right here below where it says assault and battery are sometimes synonymous, but there is a clear difference in the general course when you start talking about assault and battery. Assault is something that can precede a battery. For example, if I raise my hand to hit you, I could be charged with assault. If I raise a weapon, I might be charged with aggravated assault because I've elevated that. And then, so it says, creates a reasonable belief that something's getting ready to happen. You're getting ready to hit me or harm me. It involves no physical contact. See, that's the point. That's why I said I have trouble with them saying in some jurisdictions battery is assault. Simple battery is assault because in the normal terms of criminal law, assault is something where you don't have to have any physical contact, and unless, like I said, in the jurisdiction they define it. That's one of the things we always tell people, that the thing about the United States of America when it comes to state laws is that the state legislatures in each individual jurisdiction define it. But when we teach you the meaning of these things, we're not looking at every statute. We're not even looking at the exceptions. We're simply giving you what the common law meaning and generally what the intent of it means to commit assault or battery. So usually you'll hear the term, I'm charging you with assault and battery. Almost every time a person has battery, they have assault before that. Now, can you think of a time when you might not have assault and then have a battery? Can you give me an idea of an instance which may be battery, but it doesn't necessarily have to be assault and battery? Can you think of one? You can type it in the chat box. I'll see it. Okay. Okay. I come up behind you and I hit you. And you didn't know I was behind you and hit you. Would you have assault? Yes or no? No, because the definition of assault is a reasonable belief that someone is about to harm you. And you don't know that. You don't know that. Now, let's say, for example, someone's shadowing you and following you or chasing you. Then you probably will have it. But if you understand what I'm saying, someone just surprises you and hits you, then that might not be. So you can have it like that. But battery comes about when a person strikes someone against their will. Now, you could give somebody permission to hit you. That's not battery. It has to be unwanted, unwelcomed, those kind of things. Let's say, for example, you give me, says you can hit me, and I hit you, and I hit you too hard, and you fall down and bump your head, and you die. What would I likely be probably charged with? What would you likely be charged with then? Any idea? Also called, you're right, but also called, what else is it called? What else did I say it could be? Some jurisdictions define it that way. What is it? Second degree murder, or did you forget, or you want me to tell you? Okay. How about involuntary manslaughter? Remember that? Uh-huh. Right there. Yeah, it could be that. Some people might say voluntary, depending on the force, but it would likely, in a situation I just described, as involuntary manslaughter. So anyway, I was just bouncing back. I'll do that sometimes to you, as Tess will do that to you. So when somebody strikes somebody against their will involuntarily, and there is some actual physical contact, it's battery. So you see why I have problems with jurisdictions that use the term assault to describe minor batteries. It cuts against the grain of what the traditional meaning of battery is, okay? So I'm not going to go over all of these details, but there are various jurisdictions that deal with, like, for example, mayhem is the most serious type of bodily harm. And so when that is disfigure or something like that, let's say you pour a caustic substance on someone like acid or something like that, and some jurisdictions might call it attempted murder. They won't call it involuntary manslaughter most of the time, but let's say mayhem, then that means that you did something to disfigure that person, injure them, pour scalding hot water, or something of that nature. Uh, and so here we go. Here's a good example right here. This paragraph says an 18-year-old girl, Angela, was at a party with a 21-year-old male, Drake, and both were drunk. As the night progressed, Angela and Drake participated in a bizarre ritual that in honor of a cult-like band that they followed. So with Angela's consent and participation, Drake sits on her wrist, slit her wrist, cut her wrist open to drink her blood. Sounds like a vampire thing. Then, to clearly show their commitment to the band, Angela allowed Drake to chop off her pinky finger. Now, without her pinky finger, Angela eventually becomes lightheaded, and was dropped off at a local hospital for treatment where she told emergency doctors what happened and the situation. So the question is, did Drake commit mayhem? And so look at what it says here to give the example in California. The description of mayhem. Every person who unlawfully and maliciously deprives a person of being a member of being a member of his body, or disables, or disfigures, or cuts, or puts in the eye. Mayhem basically is defining this across the country. So is he guilty of mayhem? Yes or no? Definitely. And mayhem is there purposely because that's crazy. Somebody might say, yeah, but she consented to it. She's high. They're both high. So the point of the matter is that it's considered as mayhem. And what they're looking at is not the consensual aspect, but the seriousness of the action. That's the key. That is the key right there. Battery occurs between complete strangers and those who love each other. So then they say in the next lecture we'll turn to domestic violence. Well, there's a little bit of domestic violence we talk about here. Here we go, right here. Now, let me say this. I am totally aware and understand domestic violence extremely well. You know why, don't you? You know? Yes. My story in my life is what led me. I talk about that in graphic detail. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it because it's the two words make it clear what we're talking about. It has to be domestic in nature, which means involves someone of an intimate relationship. It can be a boyfriend, paramour. It could be a girlfriend, someone who lives with you. And, so for most domestic violence, it says two adults, at least 18 years old, who live together or have a child in common. Now, if you don't live with them and you have a child in common, you can still be guilty of that because of the relationship that is established by the fact that you have that child. So state law requires, in order for domestic abuse cases to be prosecuted, the crimes must have occurred within the context of a domestic relationship. And in most states, it says a domestic relationship exists of the crime, such as somebody committing a battery against somebody. If the relationship exists, then the offense of the battery becomes domestic, and it elevates it. It makes it more serious because, once again, and I close my eyes because I see things that happen to me, and when I'm talking about this, I think about in terms of what, like, for example, the picture. Look at the picture in here. The picture shows the child sitting at the top of the stairs and something happening at the bottom, probably their parents. And that child sees that. I know what that's like because I did that. And so it happens in a physical manner. It could be verbal as well. It says domestic violence can take forms such as physical violence, sexually assault. My siblings, we lived in a situation where an uncle that we lived with after my mother and father were killed that had his way with them. So we're talking about things like that, where incest and those sickening kind of things that occur. And so a child is abused. And so anyway, if the domestic relationship exists, then the offense of battery is elevated. And then it talks about the different forms it can take in the next paragraph, and I've already described those there. So it says here In some jurisdictions, such as Alaska, the definition of domestic violence extends further and include adults or minors who are current or former spouses, live or have lived together, or are dating or have dated, have engaged in sexual relationship, or have a child in common. And the reason for that, in terms of Alaska, is because some of the Native Americans that are in Alaska have marriage and sexual events that happen before they turn 18 and can be as early as 12 years old. So that's the reason why that is like that in Alaska. There's a lot of jurisdictions now that you run across it, but Alaska still has it on their books, as far as I know them anyway. So the law enforcement officers in jurisdictions, we were specifically trained that when we answer domestic calls to be on what we call high alert, and the reason being is because the you arrive at a domestic violence call, and generally there's some disarray there, and the person who will have called you is a potential danger to you as well. Here's the reason why with a scenario, and this happened in one of my, more than one, but just to give you one of my experiences as a law enforcement officer. We arrive at the scene noting the call that it was domestic, and when we arrive there, we're prepared for that. We're watching everybody. So anyway, we end up talking to the person, and the person is put in the handcuffs, and you know the person's trying to struggle, and my partners shove him to the ground, and he's on the ground, and so my assignment was to watch the lady, and so I did. I watched her. I kept my eyes on her. I wasn't paying attention to them specifically. I did see it, but here's what happened. She said, "That's my man. You don't hurt him. He's the father of my children." She's bleeding. She's got bruises all over her face. That man that she's talking about now actually had beat her, and that was what the call was all about. And it happens. You have to really, really, really learn that. And I can tell you, all too often, the other thing that happens in those instances is when we're called is that we have to, of course, recognize the person may have a weapon and they may not, but that they're at a stage or level, if they do have a weapon, where they may be holding the kids as well as the spouse hostage and not letting them go, saying things like, "I'm going to kill everybody in here if you come in here," or something like that. Those are the kinds of things that we're talking about. One of the things that happened to me when I was living with that same aunt and uncle, the one that was the bad that went through my sisters, he had a habit of pulling out guns, and he told us as kids that everybody sit down and line up against the wall, and he got his gun out. I was able to get out of the house, and then I heard a gunshot go off, where I heard later that he had accidentally fired the gun, not at my sisters, but it hit the floor. The bullet, the gun was face down, but it went off. So my point being to you is that was domestic in nature, and that was something. So anyway, the bottom line is that states now have special ways that they deal with domestic violence. It says in that last paragraph, it says the enforcement, not the last one, but the one under the picture, the last one before you get to the link, says the enforcement of criminal laws in the U.S. allow officers to use discretion to determine the best way to resolve a situation. When discretion is permitted, police officers may resolve a matter with a warning, a citation, or arrest. And so some jurisdictions require that even if nothing much is going on, they still have to escort somebody out of the house, and they do that. And so there's more about it when you check this link, and I'm not going to go to that link. Then it talks about battery and stuff like that. And so we now come to sexual assault crimes. Rape at common law was the act of unlawful or unwilling sex between a male and a female. Well, now it's different. It could be a male with a male or a female with a female. And so it's gender neutral. That's the point. No means no. And oftentimes there are issues that some people will try to raise who are ignorant of these things. Says sexual assault requires that the intercourse took place. Also that there was a touching. However, it doesn't have to actually go that far. So it says in here, sexual assault. Notice what I said, assault. Remember what we learned earlier from assault. It doesn't mean actually that it happened, but the person was placed in the position of being apprehensive about the probability that that would take place, that there would be a sexual act. So, however slight of the touch, any part of the victim's genital area or other body parts without their consent is considered as sexual assault. Okay? So, law enforcement officers must be trained, and it's very important, males and females, to be able to deal with the quick response in terms of this type of a crime. Time is of the essence. Also, as far as putting cases together, because information gets stale. Even dealing with the DNA and collecting what's necessary to prove that a person actually did do something. Another aspect of investigating these cases is for law enforcement to consider and properly apply the elements of sexual assault offenses in the facts of an actual incident. It means that they know what the elements are and comparing them to what happened on a case-by-case basis. So let's take a look at just a little bit here. First degree criminal sexual assault, based on what the state of Minnesota says. It says anybody who engages in sexual penetration. Now, it didn't say assault or nothing. It just says the conduct of committing a sexual crime, okay, with another person or in a sexual contact with a person under the age of 13 is guilty of this conduct in the first degree, because the idea is to protect minors. And we go down and we look at these elements, and I don't have to go into them specifically. Then we get into second degree. Prohibits a person from engaging in sexual conduct under what we talked about in Section 1. Sexual contact is the intentional touching or fondling of the genital areas of an individual. So we get to the point that it doesn't have to involve actual penetration in terms of the law, but just simply just touching it, just crazy stuff. People do, let me tell you, it's simple as this. I'm going to say this, because I saw a case like this before in court. It wasn't mine, but I was sitting there. The person was guilty of criminal sexual conduct because what they did, they were changing the diaper of a baby, and they put their lips on the genital area, and they were caught on videotape. So that's crazy, but that's what happened. And so then that person is guilty of that offense. Somebody says, oh, well, it didn't really hurt the child. Forget all that. We're not talking about that. We're talking about protecting the child because the child doesn't have the capacity to say yes, no, or anything. Okay? So that's the deal. Then there's third degree criminal sexual conduct in Minnesota. Forbids a person from engaging in sexual penetration with another in any of these instances. Under 13, the victim is 13 to 15, and the actor is more than 2 years older. So once again, protecting younger children. Then it talks about family relationships, employees, employer situations. It can involve schools. It can involve a number of things. So a person could be involved and have a weapon or not have a weapon, but place that person in a position where they know is not necessary. Then fourth degree prohibits from engaging in sexual conduct under the same circumstances as in the third degree. So we get all the way down to fifth. Then we deal with statutory rape. And statutory rape basically involves having sex with a minor, a person who is under the age of 18. And it varies according to various jurisdictions. In Illinois, it was statutory rape is 14 to 17. And the defense that used to people try to argue is they looked that way or they had phony ID. Illinois and many jurisdictions apply statutory rape as what we call strict liability laws. In other words, these laws don't require that the person can use as a defense, I didn't know. It's one of those ignorance of the law. It's no excuse type of laws. And so the mere act of engaging in sex with a person who can't legally consent, they don't have the legal qualifications in age or so forth, then in that case, then it is never a defense to say that they consented because they can't. They can't. And so that's pretty much covering all of those things. So now let's get down here. Again, as I'm going to conclude in a few minutes, remember these little things that we have had included in the course to help you. Key terms. Click on the key terms and open them up, and it tells you there are various ways that you can do this. And there we go. Slow acting. The best way, as I've already said it, is flashcards. Then you have to run Adobe. I do anyway. And then it's going to show up now. So if you see that, don't call PSC. Just do what I just did, and it'll say allow, and click allow. So then it comes about. So here's a flashcard that creating a reasonable belief in someone that harm may occur. What is that?
Assault.
Yep. Assault. Very good. The intentional injury of one human to another without consent.
Battery.
Nope. I tried to fake you out.
I was like, oh.
No, you're right. That's exactly what it was. I like to do that sometimes. Are you sure?
I know, right?
Just because the professor does it, nah, you better, with Professor Wright, you gotta know. But that's the way it's going to be for real. The intentional causing of death of one person by another when the homicide is done without prior intent but occurs in the heat of passion, similar to adequate provocation.
Second degree murder, involuntary manslaughter.
or voluntary manslaughter.
Or voluntary.
Yeah, and again, it depends on jurisdictions. But the key thing I was just going to say is just remember it involves manslaughter. Now, if you have a test and the question gives you four choices, whether it's going to be voluntary or involuntary manslaughter, you're going to have to stop again and pay close attention to what the facts are, because they'll usually tip you off to eliminate one or the other. And if they say something like it was done accidentally, then you're going to pick voluntary or involuntary manslaughter.
Involuntary.
There we go. You're on your way to becoming a lawyer. Okay. Because you got a little ways to go, but all right. A course of action that shows actual or deliberate intention to harm, which is not intentional, shows an utter indifference or conscious disregard for the person's safety. What is that?
Oh, I forgot. I forgot this one.
You already said it. Utter disregard or utter indifference. Basically, that would be involuntary manslaughter. But it's utter disregard or that means you just like speeding and somebody gets killed. That's what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Driving under influence. Let's do one more. A course of action that shows actual or deliberate intention to harm, or which is not intentional. If not intentional, shows an utter indifference, which we just know, to or conscious disregard of a person's safety and the safety of another. So what is that? You already said it.
Utter disregard or manslaughter.
This again, it's the same thing. See, I gave you the same thing all over again. You already did. I told you you have to watch me.
Tricky.
Yeah, I know. But I'm showing you. You said, wait a minute, did you do that one already? So what did it say last time? Say the same thing. Okay. So then if I hit this next thing. But anyway, last thing. When one person kills another, but there is no premeditation or malice or forethought, evil intent, none of that, but reckless actions which cause their death. What is that?
Second degree.
No, you're right. You were right. Involuntary manslaughter is often second degree murder or manslaughter. So anyway, don't get too hung up on some of those things not being exactly that, because unfortunately, as I try to tell students, it's going to depend on that jurisdiction that you're in that's going to determine that. Okay? So let's go back. I don't want to do that. Get rid of that. What did I do? Okay. Okay, I got to go back. I got to take this out. I know what I just did. Oh. Okay. So I got to go back to this. I open it back up. Okay. Give me a minute, because I clicked too many times. Here we go. Let's open that up. I'm trying to wait for Firefox to come up. Hold on a minute. New tab. Okay, it's going to come to my home page. Okay, I got to log back in. Should be still there because we just did it. Okay. Hold on. Okay, I got to log back in. Okay, I logged back in. So now let's go back to this and this. Okay, here we go. Okay, now I got to go back to here, and I got to make sure I'm sharing with you. Okay, here we go. All right, there we go. Now, so now we go back down to where we were. And so now the key terms. So then you have the practice for special circumstances, which operates pretty much the same way. And so then you start the activity. So now you're given a fact pattern. Okay, Jane and Phil have been married for 10 years and have 2 children together. Jane also has a drinking problem. Jane came home drunk. She had an argument with Phil. Phil threatened to leave Jane and take the children if she didn't get help. Enraged, Jane shot Phil and fled with the children. Now, this is a special circumstances one. I kind of glanced over them. But which of the circumstances would you say fit here of the special?
The first one. Coercion. Yeah.
Okay, let's see what it says. I don't know. I'm not sure, but we'll see. What do you think? Nope, not quite. Adequate provocation would likely be claimed in this case. So, because she was so upset. So, which one? Adequate provocation. Continue. Adequate provocation because she was upset. She was in the heat of passion. But that was special circumstance situation, so we didn't kind of like spend a whole lot of time. So anyway, you can go through these different scenarios, and you can end up doing the same thing. And you can go through each question, and then you can do them over if you want, and then you can repeat them till you get the right one, and then just click on down. So you got that. Okay, so special circumstances. Okay. So we're back to course content. This is what I was trying to do last time. And then finally, we get to the bottom here. Okay, here we go. So we get to the homicide classifications. Okay, so then you got the homicide classifications. Do the same thing. Click on open it. So you start the activity. Frank has a long-standing hatred for Kim. Frank purchased a handgun and hid behind the bushes outside Kim's apartment, and he was going to do something. She exited, he shot her and killed her. What homicide fits perfectly in this?
First degree.
Why?
Intent.
And can be demonstrated by his doing what?
Purchasing the handgun.
That's part of it.
And hiding behind the bushes.
So then that means he planned it. He plotted it. He laid it out. Absolutely. Absolutely. And if this doesn't turn right, then I'm going to say something's wrong with this question. No, it's correct. First degree murder is correct because his actions demonstrate that he really wanted to kill her. It was intentional. We would say sometimes knowingly and intentional. And he premeditated based on the planning. Laid in wait. So, yeah. So that's it. Okay. John is a member of a gang and has a ongoing battle for drug sales, which that's a common activity between gangs. John tells his other gang members that he's going to kill Jose, who's a rival gang member. John leaves armed with a gun and kills Jose at a street corner. What homicide classification do you give this one?
That one's first degree too.
I would. Yep, because it's the same elements. He
Mhm.
displayed an intent and so forth, and he was intentionally doing it. So it wasn't. Jackson and two of his friends are hanging out on the top floor of a parking ramp. Jackson, who had a violent history, targets another man, Rick, and tells his friends, "Watch this. I'm gonna kill that dude." Jackson punches Rick in the face, picks him up, and throws him over the ledge. Rick falls to his death. What homicide here?
That first degree too.
And the survey says yes. You didn't get psyched out because you had to. That's what every word he said. He first talked about it. Remember we talked about that earlier. He said he bragged about it. He said I'm getting ready to kill this dude. Now if he didn't do it, that talking, and then he punched him in the face, and then he may fell over the ledge, then we might have involuntary or voluntary manslaughter, but probably voluntary manslaughter. Last one. Mike is drag racing against Matt in a highly populated entertainment area district. Mike drives through a red light at a high rate of speed and collides with another vehicle, killing the driver of that vehicle. What homicide classification do we give?
Involuntary manslaughter.
So would I. Nice work. Yep. Because reckless disregard and that kind of stuff, but he didn't really set out to kill somebody. He was joyriding and doing drag racing. I had a friend who actually graduated from high school with me in 1969, and he went to watch some dudes drag racing, and one of the cars lost control, hit him, knocked him up, knocked him into the river, and they couldn't find his body for 3 days. Thus, he drowned. So they did arrest the person, and they charged him with exactly that. And then the last thing that I encourage you to do, we're a little over, but we're about done here, is whatever you do, very, 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 as I say in Spanish, muy importante. Well, that's close to what I'm supposed to be saying. But very important. Do this because it'll tip you off to the quizzes. And so here's what I say, and I might have even asked this before. If you're going to take this quiz in week 3, which you are, what chapters will it cover? 3?
1 through 3. Weeks 1 through 3.
I like the way you ask questions. You ask questions like, I think so. And you are right. Yes. Yeah, it is. It's going to be the material. So you go back and look at it. Use your PowerPoints as an outline to help you as well. You don't have to read all the chapter. PowerPoints are good because they break it down and give you an outline kind of thing. So just an example of the kind of thing that you run into. An intent to cause death with premeditation is considered what type of murder? With premeditation.
First degree.
Okay, you're going to be a prosecutor, I can tell. You're right. Or a defense lawyer, one or the other. Anyway, the bottom line is yes. So anyway, that's how all that works. So you want to go ahead and do that. So it's been good. I hope you enjoyed the class today. And so I'm going to give you a word, and the word I want to see is manslaughter. That's it. Okay? You got it? I think so. All right. So,
Yep. Thank you. Good night.
you're welcome. Good night, and have a good week.
You too.
All righty.